And good morning. The village in Howard is now in session, and today we have life planning for today's realities in long-term care. And that's a conversation I hear quite often these days. Today we welcome Mchael Mooney, who is managing partner of Pilot Financial, and Brian Jolles of Jolles Financial. Both Mchael and Brian are Howard County residents with their families, as well as their companies are located here in the Howard County area. I always ask a few questions of the speakers when I'm doing the introduction to get a better idea of a little bit personal information from them. So Mchael graduated from the University of Maryland in College Park with a degree in finance. He and his wife have 3 children and live in the Clarksville area. From a personal note, their children went to Athelton High School, as did my grandchildren. And I have a suspicion they knew each other, about the same ages. I asked both men to give me some information on what they're passionate about. How did they get started in this industry that they're in? Mchael's answer: my passion is helping people and working with them to achieve their goals and dreams. And so I'm sure we will learn that that is a true statement today. Brian is the founder and senior advisor of Jolles Financial, where he has served clients in the insurance and financial industry for 39 years. Brian attended the University of Delaware.
Maryland.
No, I said that wrong.
Yeah.
You went to the University of Delaware.
I was Maryland.
Michael did.
I was Delaware, yeah.
My apologies.
That's
All right.
okay.
What can I say?
Both great schools.
You should have hit me for that.
That's right.
Okay, so Brian attended the University of Maryland in College Park, started his profession with New York Life, and in 1986, he and his wife Lisa launched their own independent agency. When I asked Brian what his passion was, he explained it this way. His passion for long-term care planning began unexpectedly during a high school research project in the 70s on Nader's Raiders, and I'm sure we all remember that. In a consumer advocacy group that revealed the challenges older adults face. That experience sparked a lifelong commitment to helping families. Ryan has a whole lot of information, and one of the things that I was struck by were there were 2. There were nonprofits that promote health and something he called boot camp in the park, and I hope that he can explain that. I'm looking forward to learning a lot today, and thank both Brian and Mchael here. And don't forget to turn your phones off, and we're going to have questions at the end. So please, Mchael and Brian.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So I'm going to start off. It's Mchael Mooney, and as you see there, I'm managing partner here at Pilot Financial. Just briefly, our group is about 110 advisors, financial advisors across the country. My office is over at Gateway Drive, and we try to look at a holistic approach to planning, which means that we really focus on financial planning and doing a financial plan sometimes. Getting involved in looking at the big picture. So that said, long-term care is a really important part of that big picture. That's really the piece that is, we look at it as something really that people should look at earlier and earlier these days, their 40s or 50s. The average age now for a long-term care insurance policy is going up, going down. So it's, like 55 to 60, a lot of people are getting it. So if we want to go to the next slide there. This is what we're doing here today to talk about planning for today's realities in long-term care. So, that'll be our subject today. We go to the next slide here. So, there's we find that people, you have a continuum of planning. And when I talk to younger people, I say to them, try to save as much as you can. Literally, I mean, put away, take out that Starbucks coffee and invest it, All of a sudden you have $40 a week because it's $10 for a coffee these days, right? So what I'm getting to here is the income side of it. Whatever we do for that first 40, 45 years we work will determine how much we can draw from for income purposes, the income piece. And then, of course, we also have expenses. And the expenses piece, one of the biggest concerns that people have these days is long-term care. They say just without long-term care that the cost of medical care, when we build it into a financial plan, averages about $250,000. So that's just health insurance costs. That's just a piece of how much do we need, if we go to a hospital, what isn't paid for by health insurance, etc. But then we also have this piece here, the long-term care, which, I was just looking at this study actually yesterday, and, the average cost for a single year of long-term care now is up to $100,000. So, think about the math there. I mean, God forbid you have to be in a long-term care facility or someplace like that for 5 years. With cost of living, you're up to close to $550,000, $600,000. So then it becomes, so that's that unexpected care cost. So then it becomes, can we figure out a way to potentially plan for that? And that's what we're going to talk about as well. So if we go to the next slide, this is what I was referring to. These numbers, so I belong to a group which I think is a good time to give a little bit more background too. So I've been part of a group called COGS here in Howard County for literally, I think it's close to 20 years now. And I really appreciate that group because they're basically serving seniors. And they're a great community. They're great for you guys as a resource. There's home health care companies there, and of course, companies like, like the Brightview and those companies are there, and attorneys and financial planners like ourselves. But they'll be happy to say that these, not happy, but they'll confirm that these numbers are correct these days. The challenges that we find is that, sometimes it's a matter of how you want to leave a legacy to your children. How much do we want to leave to our children? And if some of that is taken away from because of long-term care, then obviously it's not as much, right? But the other piece of it is that, I'm looking at these key findings. This is the certification for long-term care group they have their own website. And, we've seen this before, but, the idea is that your children aren't always, able to, first of all, help if something happens, God forbid. And if they do, I have stories of clients of mine that their children are in their 50s or 60s, and they have to take time out of work for long-term care to help their parents. Usually it's something they obviously feel is very important to do, but it's hard on them too, is the point, because they're there to help, but they have to now kind of take over to help out something sometimes that, they're not either qualified for or maybe don't have the time for. So, caregiver challenges is a big piece of this. Caregivers with long-term care insurance are often, they have these additional policy features with long-term care. There's respite benefits, care coordination, but it also gives you that freedom as long as the long-term care piece. So let's go to the next page here. So, we're talking about, this is, I think, a good slide because it talks about reactive and proactive. The reactive piece is going to be, well, if there's no plan, if you've got we look at studies, and depending on a client's amount of assets, the reactive could be okay, meaning that if your assets are maybe net worth $3 or $4 million or something along those lines, you're going to have some money if long-term care happens, right? You might say, well, I'm still not leaving as much as I'd like to my kids, but you've got the assets. But if you're in that range of $250,000 to, $1 million, sometimes people even say $2 million of assets, then the long-term care can happen, and then it's going to be, we don't want to be in a situation where we have to go towards Medicaid. That's kind of a personal situation. My grandmother, grandfather didn't save a whole lot of money, and she did have to go to a place for long-term care. And fortunately, my mom worked literally for months on this, and we were able to find a Catholic Charities group over in Arbutus to bring her to. But really, we were stuck for quite a while. And even that place was nice because it was there, but it wasn't where, like my mom said, Mom, this is not where I want to be at her age, So that's where the Medicaid comes in. I mean, you've got very limited resources. So the proactive is, do we have the ability to maybe guard against that? And that's where the long-term care insurance can come in sometimes. The other piece that I will talk to people about on a proactive basis is if they're younger, depending on their age, if you're not going to do long-term care insurance in some way, then maybe set aside some money for that benefit. It's going to probably have to be a decent amount of money, but make sure that that's there and it's set up to provide for that. So we talked also about the family impact as well. The care choices are important because going back to long-term care, I've got clients that have long-term care with me, or maybe another, sometimes it's the government and they got it through them. And then I've had some that haven't. I always find that the ones that have the long-term care insurance, their families are, they treat themselves better, is the best way to put it. They're not afraid to go to a nicer place for long-term care because there's money that's available. So it gives you that choice, which is, less stress on the family and obviously a nicer place to go to. So, is this where you want to come in? Okay, great, thanks.
Yes, I'm going to pick it up where he left off. So I think Michael did a great job explaining the problem. The problem is the cost, and it's not about having an insurance policy. It might be part of someone's planning. It's about having a plan. So I've got a front row seat on the realities, and I love the title of this presentation because you can have long-term care. Michael alluded that it gives you peace of mind knowing that you have something in your hand, that you have assets that he helped you, grow in a portfolio. But the realities when they hit you in the face are not what you think it is. You check a box and say, I have it, but is it designed right? How do you use it when it's time to go on claim? How do you navigate structuring in the first place? Do you have the right provisions in it? So I'm going to hit those things, and I'm going to stick with what long-term care has been for the last 30 years, 35 years that it's been around. I'm a little bit embarrassed to say that I've watched the history of long-term care evolve from the very beginning, because I've been around that long. But I do realize there's more modern ways to address long-term care than traditional long-term care, and Michael's going to be presenting that when we go further in the presentation. But I'm going to give you the nuts and bolts of what it is, and then some of the mistakes and things you need to look at now. Even when you have a policy, what can you be thinking about? And how do I actually go on claim if that's happened? So let's talk about the realities. So staying on this slide, I'm just going to talk about just kind of nuts and bolts of long-term care. First of all, what is it? Long-term care starts, when you look at long-term care insurance, traditional long-term care insurance, which most people in our age brackets, and many of the people who will be watching this video, wouldn't have had the opportunity to have what's called a hybrid. I think your children and those currently now looking at long-term care need to look at that sort of situation. And again, we're not going into detail because Michael's going to address it thoroughly. So I do want to say that traditional long-term care starts with understanding a concept called ADLs, Activities of Daily Living. And I'm looking in our audience today, and I know there are several people here that really understand that part. And it's a starting place for all of us that are in that space. Those are the 6 things, plus cognitive impairment, or I'll say, or cognitive impairment. They often come together, but not always, that define what long-term care insurance is. Okay, it's the inability to do 2 of 6 of these activities of daily living is typically the definition of long-term care insurance. Okay, it's being able to provide coverage when it's needed, defined as these triggers, the 2 out of 6 activities of daily living. So what are they? The first one almost always starts in realities. That's how I'm going to go with that. They list them, but they might as well just say bathing right off the top. Because whether you can transfer, whether you have continence issues, whether you need help dressing, you know, all those things come into play at some point for many of us, but the bathing comes on early. Getting in and out of the bathtub or shower, and that's what it is. It's either hands-on or standby assistance. And there's the first glimpse at how complicated it can be, because you really look at the small print of the policy that you may own or look at. Those are the kind of definitions that are important. Is it someone standing by, available at arm's length to be able to help you? Or does the policy actually require you to physically help them get in and out of a shower? So we really get into these definitions. And so when I review a policy, I'm looking for that, both when I offer it and both when I just review it to make sure that people know what they have. Okay, so 6 ADLs, bathing first. Second, dressing. And to be clear, it's not just dressing, it's just the inability you need assistance with at least one article of clothing. So if somebody can't put their shoes on, and I find many seniors are now wearing, me this morning, I don't have shoelaces, and I can tie them still, but someday I might not be able to. But I can certainly pop my feet into these. So we find a lot of people, well before they'll express that they need help dressing, they find ways to work around that. It's one of the reasons why a lot of people don't go on to care much longer than, but they come way after they should. They should be on a lot earlier in many cases. So dressing is that assistance. It might be snapping a bra on. It might be being able to put your arm back just to put your shirt on. Any one of those things would allow you to say, I need assistance with that activity of daily living. The other ones I'll go through a little quicker, but I just wanted you guys to get the understanding. So you've got bathing, you've got dressing, you've got toileting, you're getting on and off the toilet. Not the same thing. The hygiene that goes along with it, but requiring continence, that's changed over the years. Originally, it was just simply if you required adult diapers, right? If you required that assistance, that would have been one of the triggers. Now, I'm finding that they're asking that question differently, and they want to know, can you manage the care of that? So if you're in public and you have an issue, can you go into a bathroom, pull something out of your pocketbook, and take care of things, and not be embarrassed, and be able to live your life? And if you can, they're not going to check the box on continence, right? So that's 3. 4 would be transferring, getting from bed to chair. And I'll get to the testing of that, because that's important, not on this slide yet. So we got dressing, and then eating is fork to mouth. It's not about preparing meals, and I want to give you a distinction there. And I'm missing one in my mind. I don't know if I rattled off 6, but if not, you get the idea. Okay, so there's 6 activities of daily living, and then there's cognitive impairment, which could be short or long-term memory loss. Somebody has difficulty monitoring their medication. They might miss their medication. I've had many clients that I've had to argue with various entities that your mom or dad is okay. They just didn't take their medication, and we should talk to a specialist because their doctor is experiencing certain things and how they're acting or reacting, and so with the family. And really, it was just a medication imbalance. I've had that happen on multiple occasions. But so monitoring the medication is really important. So we've got, that could be short-term memory loss. I don't know if I took the pill or not, right? So from there you can go, if they're going to wander off, obviously the obvious things. So we got ADLs. When you build a policy, there's the main components. Elimination period, first of all, the benefit amount. How do you calculate it? You go to someone like Michael or myself, and you find out how much you need. He alluded to that earlier. How much do you actually need in retirement? What are your finances? If you've got $3 or $4 million of assets, then probably you could afford to just have the income flow come directly from that. If you've got $500,000 of assets, probably not. Probably somewhere in your life, you want to be looking at other resources to build around that because you'll spend that down. Michael alluded to $250,000, and he said that really you're talking largely about the health care costs. You get in the hospital, there's things around that. Long-term care sneaks in there. It's probably closer to $300 to $350. That you have $1,000 that you're going to be seeing come from your portfolio. If you take the other things, that Michael was mentioning on top of that, right? So take that total number, and the average is about 3 years that somebody spends in care. That's average, which means people spend 4, 5, 6. I have clients now that are 8 or 9 years in to a long-term care claim. So we're looking at the realities of how you structure a policy. That first thing is the benefit. I want you to think of it differently. You aren't buying a policy. I'll keep alluding to this as we have this presentation. I think it's one of the most important points, is that you're buying a bucket of money. Okay, it could be your investments, it could be part of the Social Security, it could be your pension, it could be some annuities that you structure, it could be life insurance proceeds. There's a lot of things where money can come from, but the bottom line is that it's about the cash flow. Okay, we're going to have a dip in that gap that Michael presented, that will present itself when long-term care does, that isn't addressed in your planning. So it's that plan B that I'm talking about. Okay, so with that said, the benefit amount matters, but inflation is critical. And depending on when you buy the policy, I have lots of my clients, I've talked to them in their 50s, 45, 50, 55. They bought traditional long-term care from me. They're now in their 70s, some of them older, and they're saying now many of them are going on claim. But the bottom line is the inflation that kept the benefit up. The average inflation rate on long-term care is just shy of 4%. When I started in the career of long-term care, we were projecting 5% actually inflation on long-term care. So I knew how critical that is. Imagine 20 years after that 50-year-old buys long-term care, and now they're thinking, oh, I might actually need this. And they can see it in their future. They've already been through it with their parents, right? And now this senior is facing a benefit amount that's level, and the cost of that same care would be twice as much. So what's the damage to your portfolio because we didn't address the inflation issue? You know, Michael and myself, when we're doing planning, we're looking at the rest of the portfolio. We're not going to have you go above your risk. What we are considering, is that growing at a pace? Is there enough other assets that will take over the difference, the shortfall, that this long-term care policy as a bucket of money is designed to take care of? Does this all make sense? Okay, so inflation is really important. The benefit period, 30 days, 60 days, not typically, 30 days, 90 days, 100 days. Those are the three.
Elimination period?
The elimination period.
Okay.
But I'm going to teach you something you probably didn't know, and those of you who have a policy, you need to look at this, you need to understand how it works. And someone like myself or your agent or advisor should look at that and do a one-pager for you. So it's all in plain English and you understand it's when you need it. But I'm going to suggest that don't think of it like a deductible. There's only one company on the planet, I won't mention names of companies right now today. There's one, I don't know if they still are in the market, this company, but theirs was like a deductible. You couldn't do those two activities of daily living, had cognitive impairment, you were sailing through with your 30 or 90 or 100 days. Every day counted, right away. One company I know does that. The rest, you have to have at least an hour of care a day, or one a day, for that day to count towards your elimination period. So that isn't you having junior, or your daughter, or friends, or your church, or religious affiliation supporting you. That was you paying for something, or Medicare covering that. And I got to be careful because when I say Medicare, I don't want people to say, oh, Medicare will cover long-term care. I won't go into detail on that. Most people now know that. It will cover on average about 30 days. You'll read in your Medicare agreement that it's up to 100 days. The operative words are up to. As soon as they find out this is not short-term care, that this is going to go 90 days or longer likely, and you're not getting better, then they stop paying. Okay, then it's all on you. It's all on your bucket of money, your cash, your plan, how you're structured, the way you're going to address long-term care. Everybody with me on that? Okay, so when you look at that elimination period, I had a client call me. I had a friend call me. I didn't handle their long-term care policy. I won't mention the name of the carrier, okay, but because carrier does good work, but this time they didn't. The family called because the mother was in the hospital for something else, not dementia. It was in there for some other issue. She was older, and they realized she had dementia, and they weren't going to release her unless they had a caregiver at home. And we were kind of going through that. But along the way, she had other physical disabilities that she couldn't get around. She needed assistance. The family called this insurance company. Customer service says, you have a 100-day elimination period. Call us when you get closer. They did what any smart person would do. They took care of things and worked their way through that $100-day elimination period. About 60 days later, they were running out of money. And they called me up and said, what are we going to do here? And I said, well, let me see your policy. And I looked through it. I said, I don't think you satisfied any days. I didn't say it quite as heartless, but I said, let's call the carrier together. When we did, I was correct. The definitions in the contract, they're pretty typical. They were doing it themselves, so it didn't count. So only days that you have at least an hour of care. Most home health agencies won't do 1 hour. There are a few that might, that we're aware of. But typically you're looking at 3 hours minimum for a home health agency. But if you did that, some contracts will say, if you do that one day a week, that you satisfy that elimination period, then that will satisfy that week. So my point is, some definitions are better than others, and you want to, this is what I'm saying, it isn't check a box and have a long-term care policy. It's understanding, how does my elimination period get satisfied? That's all I want you to remember. You've got to be asking, how does that elimination period get satisfied? Okay, I wanted to give you these sort of examples. We can go to the next slide. So I wanted you to understand that it's a technical policy. There's a lot of little small language in there that matters. And you want to know before you get to where you have to navigate this later on. Okay, so navigating policy changes. Insurance companies go up in cost. You guys are aware of that. Homeowners does, auto does, health insurance does. This promise, and I'm using that word on purpose, this promise that your rate won't go up is just that, it's a promise. Traditional long-term care, Michael's going to talk about something different, but traditional long-term care, it's almost definite that that rate's going to go up during someone's lifetime. I knew that as a young agent. Before it ever did, I was telling my clients, don't buy the policy. I tell them, don't buy my policy unless your portfolio, your planning, will allow you to handle at least a 20% increase. That's what I projected. They hadn't done it, but they also didn't have a long history of paying claims and understanding inflation and understanding people living longer and understanding that they were going to get hit with low interest rates at different parts of the, going forward. Why an insurance company actuary wouldn't factor all this in, don't ask me. I've argued on many times about this with a lot of those actuaries and those insurance companies. But the bottom line, they didn't price it right. So most of the older long-term care traditional policies are going up, and unfortunately it's not 20%. It's 60, 70, 100, and even more. And if you're not in Maryland, many states it's all at one time. I bought a policy for my sister with a company, and she's in Maryland. It went up 75% in 1 year, about 8 years, 10 years into her having that policy. If she had been in Virginia, she would have to pay that 75% all in year one when it was billed. Being in Maryland, she's still got to pay it, but it's 15% is the max that they can do if you bought a policy and it's in Maryland. So again, not going to go into too much more detail on this. I just want you to know that you have to have clarity on, not yet, but long-term care. You have to have clarity on the benefit design, but you also have to realize that along the way, to think of the policy as like any other insurance. You know, it's a given. It's going to go up. You want it to go up, and I'm going to say you want it to go up. And this is a really crazy thing for me to say. Why would I say something like that? Because you bought something that you want to make sure. You want to have that peace of mind that Michael was talking about, of knowing that that's going to be there in the future when you need it. Okay, and in order to do that, the insurance company does, in fact, need these dollars. They're not just raising the money because they're greedy. They're raising it because they want to be able to pay those claims in the future. So when you think of it that way, you have to then decide, how am I going to redesign this policy if I get these rate increases? So the last quick few comments on this slide. I want you guys to realize that many people will just not call someone like myself or Michael. And they'll just say, well, I can't afford this, a rotten insurance company, I'm just going to drop it. After all that money, remember the purpose of the value of this policy. So the question is, how do I navigate the rate increase? So I'll give you a quick example. That inflation thing I told you about, it's 50% of the premium in most cases. If you actually look at the breakdown of the cost of your policy, and you don't have inflation, then you better minimize the impact of what that policy is going to do in your plan. But if you have a lot of years left, that's going to erode the value of that benefit. So you better be having Michael or myself or your advisor, figuring out how we're going to handle the cash shortfall because you don't have what you thought you had, right, without the inflation. Now you have the inflation, and you're, let's say, 75 years old. You're looking at life expectancy. You're looking at health issues. You're considering all the things. You're wondering the value of the inflation rider going forward. At some point, I'm telling my client, let's drop the inflation rider. They will adjust it that way. Now your benefit's going to stay level. We got a good pot of money, and your investments are going to handle the rest. And this inheritance that you got over here, that's going to take care of the shortfall because we don't have additional inflation going forward. But it's looking at the big picture and how it all fits together. So inflation is important. It depends on what age, depends on health, depends on lots of factors. You need to talk to someone. They need to think about and consider the right changes. So inflation will be the big one. What I like is looking at the crossover point, I'm going to call it. I created a little spreadsheet where look at what if we drop the benefit by 25%. You're 58, 60 years old, we'll drop the benefit by 25%, keep the inflation rider. Where are we going to go back over where you are now? We're going to catch up. You know, if we're going to catch up and you're still 75, and you're thinking, well, mom didn't need it till 90, and I'm probably going to go the distance here, and I'm worried about my 80s or later, then maybe we take that risk, and we drop the inflation, we keep the inflation, and we drop the benefit by 25, 30%. I'm going kind of quick, and I apologize for this, because we got to cover a lot of material. But as you're growing the benefit, eventually you have a crossover point, and then going forward you have the ability, you made the right decision, and you still can take the inflation off the table. Another bite of the apple, right? So there's different things besides just inflation and the benefit amount, but I want you to kind of see. Okay, the slides will come back in a second, but I'll go right to the next slide, I know what it is. Okay, that next slide is understanding claims process. So now you have to go and claim. I want you to know your benefits well enough. You don't have to know it as well as I do, but you have to know enough of what your elimination period is. You got to have had conversations with your family members. You have to have a plan, not just a policy, of how this thing's going to work with your overall planning. So when the day comes and you have to get on the phone, and it will be you or one of your loved ones, most likely, who doesn't really have, they're not lawyers, and they may not be insurance brokers or financial advisors who have a background in what we're talking about, but you need to be on the phone with them if you're helping somebody else. Or someone like ourselves needs to be on that call. Because here's what happens on the other end of the phone. You're getting that front end person, and they're saying, can you get in and out of the bath or shower without assistance? And I'll hear on the other end of the phone a faint voice, an elderly woman, and she'll say, yes. And then the person will say, okay, and they check that box, and they go, what about dressing? And I stop them right there. Because what I tell them is, that's the wrong question. The question is, how do you feel when you're getting in and out of that bathroom or shower? Are you nervous about that? Are you off balance? Are you concerned about falling? And often I'll hear them on the other, this is not even scripted. I just know what's going to come out of her mouth. Yeah, I almost fell once, or I fell once. And I said, oh, so do you think that you would benefit from having someone there providing assistance? And they said, yeah, probably. I said, what if your doctor did this? Would they likely recommend that? And they would say, yes. And I turned back to customer service. I go back to customer service and I would say, we're going to check that box if they need assistance for bathing. Not going to go forward with dressing, but you got my message. It's not about whether you can slip your feet into the shoes. I've had too many clients that I've talked to years later realize they should have been on claim a lot earlier. Flip it. I think we're off the mic. I think you flip this.
Yeah, I'll wrap it up. Let's go to the next screen. A few minutes.
Yeah, go to the next screen. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm going to wrap this up real quickly, but there are, one of the benefits to the last 15, 20 years move over here, 15, 20 years of the long-term care and how it's changed is that really 20 years ago, everybody was doing the individual long-term care, and that was it. And the biggest issue, as Brian said, was there wasn't guaranteed, the premiums weren't guaranteed. So now we're seeing, really honestly, more of the money is going towards these hybrid solutions. And a hybrid solution, just to wrap it up real quick, it's going to provide life insurance and long-term care. That's nice because, pardon the joke, but nobody's figured out how not to pass away yet. So you're going to get some benefit for your children, or your spouse, to a long-term care, to the life insurance. It's going to provide less benefit in general than long-term care, but to wrap it up really quickly, it's better for a lot of people because they don't know if they're going to have a long-term care issue or not. So this will provide, like if it's $50,000, it might provide $250,000 of long-term care benefit and $100,000 of life insurance. That would be an example. So now we know we're getting some benefit there, right? So that's one of the biggest things that people look at if they don't stay with long-term care, the traditional. The other thing is a lot of these policies are guaranteed not to go up in premium. So that's really key. They even have ones, my aunt is single, never had children, and she's got one with an annuity. So it's an investment with long-term care. And as the annuity goes up, the long-term care goes up. So it becomes like a regular investment. So that we wanted to hit, and then the next, I think, is, let me just go.
We're getting that, by the way, we got 9 minutes. Which is, we're on the last page. Do you want to go longer on your explanation?
Oh, no, I think it's, I mean, we
Okay, yeah, so go ahead, if you want to continue with hybrids, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, so I mean, this is the continuum, and these are just really different ways to use long-term care. And I'll just spend a couple minutes here. Traditional long-term care insurance, we know that, we talked about it. Self-funding, that just means taking it out of savings. HSA, a lot of people have HSAs, they're not as often. Reverse mortgage is an option. It's not my favorite, but it's there. If you have to mortgage your house to get benefit, to get money, coming in, we don't suggest that. Employer plans, which some of us have, but as I think I've heard with the government and other plans, they're going up in premium. And then Medicaid is kind of last resort, and then we have these other two that are the annuity and they're called hybrids. So what we're doing is we're looking at telling clients if their premium maybe have gone up, let's just take a look at these options and see if they make sense. So, and we're going to be honest. I've been in business over 40 years. I'm not going to be the person that says this does make sense to you if it doesn't. I wouldn't be in this business that long if I did that. And I'm trying to remember last.
See, leave that slide. Sorry. What slide that, if you don't mind?
Yeah.
We've got 7 minutes. I want to make a few comments more about this is really the meat of it. I'm really sorry we've got about 7 minutes.
You can go longer.
No, 7 minutes is good. Okay, so what we have on this slide, he hit all the main points. I want to wrap it up with this slide though. And I want to say again, it's not about the policy. This is sort of the top looking down. Now you're looking above and saying, oh, I get it. Okay, and hopefully if you take anything away from today in this presentation, it's this message. There are lots of ways, and way more than what you even see on this wheel here, of how you would navigate long-term care. And I'm going to suggest it's a number of them. I'm going to give you a really quick story, combining some, just so you kind of see what we're. This again, realities of long-term care. I'm going to bring in the reverse mortgage. I've got a woman who, about 7 or 8 months ago, she doesn't have enough to take care of her income right now. She did have significant assets, had to retire earlier than she expected. She does have some health issues. Her long-term care premium went up. So we discussed how we're going to navigate that, and we made that so it was still a viable part of her portfolio, and that's the key. Make it viable. Don't just drop the benefits, say, okay, here we got, what are we going to do? Make it so it still makes sense in the overall planning. Okay, how do we plan around that? We did take a part of her portfolio and created a hybrid strategy utilizing an annuity that will allow it to continue to grow, but we're going to get about 3 times leverage in a strategy like that. So utilizing a hybrid to get about 3 times the leverage. So you put $100,000 in, it's a $300,000 pot of money for if it's utilized as an annuity. So there are things like that. As Michael said, hybrid strategies by definition are almost always guaranteed. So you put a certain amount in, that's it. You're paying a certain amount of premium, it's a whole life policy. It's not about the life insurance policy, it's about the long-term care strategy. By utilizing that sort of a platform, it's about having that a contract, be able to give you something. You don't have to worry in the future whether any of the things are going to move, that they're going to move the fence post, the goal post, right? So we introduced that. We introduced the reverse mortgage. We went ahead and we did it. We flipped the switch. She's now got income coming in that if she has to bring a caregiver in, part of it will come from the income from the reverse mortgage. And then we looked at the remaining portfolio and said, how do we structure this? And we're looking at her risk, but maybe minimizing a little bit more, trying to stay at least with inflation. So we can create an income flow that's consistent and reliable to make up any shortfall. So there's taking this sort of look at it. I want to make a couple comments about Medicaid. Many people will tell you, estate planning attorneys, there's something called half a loaf. It's a whole other presentation all to itself. We've got 5 minutes and we're going to have closing remark. Okay, now I'm looking at my watch here. Okay, so the attorneys will say half a loaf, and they'll tell someone, let's take half of your assets. Let's move it into a trust. It's a 5-year look back. As long as you move the assets out, move it into this trust, it's no longer in your hands, it's no longer in your spouse's hands, it's in a trust. Okay, if something were to happen within the 5 years, they look back and say, oh no, you can't spend out for Medicaid because the money's sitting here in the trust. It's a great idea if you've got 5 years to do that kind of planning. There are people who it's right now. I've got a client that I spoke to this morning before I even came in here that I'm working with who has, I'll just say, let's say north of $500,000 of assets. It's a significant amount of money to him and his family. He is concerned about legacy. We're not going to do that. We don't have 5 years. He has Parkinson's. And he will be needing to go on care. It's just a question of when. So when it does, I'm expecting sometime later this year. we're going to take advantage of a provision in the tax code that allows them to transfer, we'll take about $300,000-400,000 of the 700, and we'll move that into her IRA. We can do that with no taxes, no penalties, even though you haven't died. So there are two ways you can do that. One, you get divorced, and the other is you take advantage of this provision that I'm referring to. You can move the money in there. She's got to put it in a special kind of annuity. There's only a few of them around, but you can put it in that annuity, and that'll pay a lifetime income. So we turn something that was going to have to be spent down into a lifetime income that surviving spouse will now have forever. They're allowed in Maryland about $140,000. I'm roughly saying that number. They can still keep in financial resources. You guys have heard the number, maybe $2,500 or some low number. That's if it's just you, but if you've got a spouse and they're living in your home, that's the number. That's what you can have there. So the point is, we'll leave that in the portfolio. Okay, and then we can turn almost immediately. Going with an attorney who specializes in that sort of planning. Anyway, we are going to finish early and take questions. We have 3 minutes left. I'm going to have any final comments. As we go to a close, I will remind you guys, go to the last slide and then we'll do this. The last slide is just to say that it's not a policy, it's a plan. And I am going to recommend, just like you have powers of attorney, durable and medical, you're telling your family and your loved ones, this is what I want. Do the same thing while you still can. And talk to your loved ones and your family what your experience needs to be if you're put in care, if you can't make decisions for yourself. Not just medical, not just managing your finances, but managing your care. Have a plan. Here you go, finishing remarks from you.
Now, I think that wraps up very well. I think we...
You got 2 minutes.
Yeah, no, I think it's, like Brian said, it's part of a plan. You know, there's a famous person many years ago, Benjamin Franklin, that said, if you plan to fail, you fail to plan. Mm-hmm. And, you know, how wise was he many years ago? So that is, whether it's investing, whether it's retirement, whether it's long-term care, whether it's your legal planning, you should all try to do that while you can, you know, while you're in good health or, you know, mentally healthy. So that's about it. I even have a piece here that is a really nice checklist of what you should and shouldn't have, as, you know, like brings everything together for you. So anyway, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
And the real threat isn't running out of